Lucan's silver rapier struck Arlen's F-tier practice sword. The noble blade split down the center. The crowd stopped laughing before the fragments hit the floor. Black gold seams opened inside the cracked wood. The practice sword swallowed the broken rapier in one clean pull. The Academy crystal changed its reading. The failed practice sword had risen to E-tier. Lucan stared at the empty grip in his hand. Someone in the stands laughed once, then went silent. Only then did the arena remember what it had mocked. Arlen was the poor royal debt student. The clerk had handed him the weakest weapon on the rack, a cracked wooden practice sword. F-tier, dead mana flow. Durability so low it should have snapped first. That was why the nobles had laughed. That was why Lucan had stepped forward with 6 floating blades. "Let me test him," he had said. Now his first weapon was gone. Arlen looked at the sword in his hand. Everyone else had seen trash. His hidden sight had seen the true name. Crownless Blade, infinite merge. It could merge with broken, defeated, abandoned, or ownerless weapons. Arlen's expression barely changed. Lucan hated that more than fear. He drew a blue frost sword next. "Cheap relic," he muttered. He swung harder. Arlen caught the blade near the split tip. Frost mana crawled across the wood. Then the crownless blade bit down. The frost sword cracked in 3 places. It swallowed the edge first. It absorbed the frost gem last. The crystal announced D-tier. Silver frost veins spread through the wooden grain. The laughing stopped completely. Lucan heard the whispers behind him. He drew 2 swords at once. One carried flame. The other carried his family crest. He forced Arlen to block left, then right, then left again. For a moment, it looked like Arlen was being pushed back. He was guiding the weapons into each other. Lucan realized too late. Arlen twisted his wrist. The flame blade slammed into the family saber. Both noble weapons cracked together. The crownless blade opened again. The flame edge disappeared first. Then the crest broke. The practice sword merged both. The crystal flashed hard enough to blind the front row. It announced unstable C-tier. The blade now carried multiple weapon traits at once. Arlen's sword stretched into a black gold longsword. The wooden core still ran through the center. Frost veins lined one side. A red flame edge burned along the other. Lucan stepped back for the first time. His final white sword trembled before he touched it. The crownless blade was pulling toward it. Marrow moved before Lucan could lose another blade. He slammed his staff into the arena floor. A barrier dropped between them. Every weapon rack locked shut. Academy Crystal tried to classify Arlen's sword again. C-tier, B-tier, F-tier. Then, blank. Finally, the crystal announced an unregistered authority. Infinite merge. A crack split through its center. Lucan pointed at Arlen like he had caught a criminal. "That is not a practice sword. He smuggled in a forbidden relic." Arlen looked down at the hungry blade. Every broken weapon in the arena was still calling to it. Then the seals around the dueling floor locked shut. Arrow aimed his staff at Arlen's chest. "Drop the weapon. Now." Arlen did not drop the sword right away. He could feel the crownless blade pulling toward every broken weapon scattered across the arena floor. Lucan's shattered rapier, the frost gem pieces, the cracked saber crest, all of it still called to the blade like loose coins rolling toward a drain. Instructor Marrow raised his staff higher. "I said drop it." The crowd held its breath. Arlen slowly lowered the black gold sword until the point touched the white stone. The moment it left his hand, the flame line dimmed, the frost veins stopped glowing, and the weapon shrank back into something closer to a cracked wooden practice sword. That somehow made the instructors more nervous. Lucan pointed at it again. "You all saw that thing eat my family blades. A practice sword cannot do that." Several nobles immediately shouted in agreement. One claimed Arlen had smuggled in a forbidden relic. Another said a commoner could not awaken a weapon authority without outside help. A third demanded that his scholarship be revoked on the spot. Arlen stayed quiet. That annoyed them even more. The vice-examiner from the noble seats finally stood. Lord Malric had not spoken during the duel, but the moment he rose, the arena went still again. His black uniform carried the crown's weapon seal, which meant his words could turn a student's victory into a crime. He looked at Arlen like he was inspecting damaged property. "Arlen Ash," Malric said. "Royal Debt Scholarship. Son of Arlen Ash, the common knight who died sealing the Greyfall breach." The whisper moved through the crowd instantly. "Charity cadet. Dead hero's debt. The crown's pity case." Malric continued like he was reading a bill. "Your father earned 1 academy seat through military compensation. That seat does not grant you the right to carry unregistered royal-class arms." Arlen finally looked up. "If it is unregistered," he said, "then why was it on the academy practice rack?" The arena went quiet enough to hear the broken frost gem ticking on the stone. Marrow turned toward the weapon clerk. The clerk went pale and hurried to the record pedestal. His hands shook as he opened the armory ledger. The pages flipped under a small mana light until the Academy Crystal repeated the entry aloud for the entire arena. Crystal said the weapon had been listed as failed training stock for 7 years. It had been rejected by 42 students, repaired 6 times, and returned to the F-tier practice rack that morning. No one laughed this time. Lucan's face twisted. That proves nothing, he snapped. It means he knew what it was and tricked the Academy into giving it to him. Arlen almost smiled at that. A few minutes ago, Lucan had called it charity trash. Now he wanted everyone to believe it was a treasure Arlen had planned to steal. Marrow ordered 2 senior guards to secure the weapon. They approached with a seizure chain made for cursed blades. The chain wrapped around the cracked wooden sword without resistance. Then the guards pulled. The sword did not move. They pulled harder. Black gold seams opened along the wood, and the chain links began to smoke. The Academy Crystal announced that the seizure attempt had failed because the weapon bond could not be transferred. One guard let go immediately. The other held on too long. The chain snapped and sent him stumbling backward across the arena floor. Malric did not look surprised. That was the worst part. He stepped down from the noble seats and walked toward the sword with a calm smile. He did not touch it. He only circled it, studying the cracks, the frost veins, and the thin red lines still buried inside the wooden edge. So it rejects seizure, Malric said. That does not make it safe. He turned to Marrow. Move the student and the weapon to the broken armory. Test it against abandoned steel, defeated steel, and cursed steel. If the authority reacts to corruption, the blade is to be sealed. The word sealed landed like a threat. Arlen understood what that meant. If the Crownless Blade was sealed by the Crown, he would never see it again. If they decided he had bonded with an illegal weapon, his scholarship would vanish with it. Lucan stepped closer to the barrier and lowered his voice enough that only Arlen could hear. You should have stayed poor quietly. Arlen picked up the practice sword again. The black gold seams faded the moment his hand touched the grip, like the weapon was pretending to be harmless. He looked at Lucan once. You should have used fewer swords. Lucan's smile disappeared. Marrow snapped his staff against the floor, and the arena gates opened into a lower passage instead of the student exit. Cold air rolled up from beneath the Academy, carrying the smell of old iron and sealed mana. The broken armory waited below. As Arlen stepped toward the stairs, the Crownless Blade trembled once in his hand. Something under the Academy had answered it. The broken armory sat 3 floors beneath Crown Rift Academy, behind a door that looked more like a prison gate than a storage room. Instructor Merrill brought Arlen there with 2 sealing chains around the Crownless Blade and 6 Academy guards walking behind him. Lucan followed at a distance with a bandage around his sword hand, trying very hard to look calm after losing 4 weapons in front of the entire arena. The weapon clerk unlocked the gate. Cold metal air rolled out. Inside, hundreds of failed blades hung from the walls. Cracked practice swords, bent sabers, rusted knight blades, broken spell staffs with their cores removed. All of them had been judged useless by the Academy and thrown down here so no noble student had to look at them again. Merrill pointed his staff toward the center table. Place the weapon there, he said. If it reacts to anything it should not, the sword gets destroyed. Arlen set the Crownless Blade on the table. The black gold seams along its wooden body dimmed, but they did not disappear. A senior examiner stepped forward and activated 3 appraisal plates. The first plate held a polished noble sword with a cracked guard. The second held 5 abandoned practice blades from the discard rack. The third held a small black dagger wrapped in old cloth. The examiner explained the test out loud for everyone in the room. The first sword was damaged but still owner-bound. The second set was broken and abandoned. The third weapon had no listed owner, no listed rank, and no active mana reading. Lucan immediately smiled. To him, the answer was obvious. If Arlen's weapon was just a cursed relic, it would try to eat the strongest thing on the table. Arlen looked at the same 3 choices. The Academy plates showed simple readings, but his hidden sight opened behind them. The noble sword was cracked, but its owner bond was still alive. The practice blades were weak, but they were truly abandoned. The black dagger was the problem. Arlen's hidden reading called it a demon-bound fragment, also warned that the merge result would grant immediate power, followed by corruption of the user's sword arm. His eyes narrowed slightly. Someone had planted it. Marrow noticed the change in his face. You recognize that dagger? He asked. No, Arlen said, but my sword does. That answer made every guard tighten their grip. The examiner removed the first seal. The Crownless Blade ignored the noble sword. The room stayed quiet. The examiner removed the second seal. The Crownless Blade trembled toward the abandoned practice blades, but the pull was steady. It was hungry, but not wild. Then the examiner removed the third seal. The black dagger twitched. The Crownless Blade lurched so hard that the table legs scraped against the stone floor. A black line opened along Arlen's wrist, even though he was not touching the handle. Lucan pointed at it instantly. There, he said. That proves it. The sword is cursed. But our guy moved before the examiner could call the verdict. Arlen grabbed the Crownless Blade with both hands and forced its tip away from the dagger. The wooden core groaned. Black gold seams opened like jaws, trying to turn back toward the stronger weapon. Arlen did not let it. He dragged the blade toward the 5 cracked practice swords instead. The Crownless Blade swallowed the weakest one first, then the second, then the third. Instead of exploding with power, the sword settled down. The Academy crystal above the table announced that the merge was stable. It said the weapon had accepted only abandoned F-tier practice blades and formed a low-risk edge pattern. Thin splinters of pale steel grew along the wooden blade. They did not look noble or polished. They looked rough, uneven, and ugly. But they were stable. The crystal named the new form Splinter Edge. For the first time since the arena, Instructor Marrow looked more confused than angry. Arlen finally let out a slow breath. "If the sword eats everything," he said, "why did it ignore the noble blade?" No one answered him. The senior examiner checked the noble sword again. Its owner bond was still active. And he checked the abandoned practice blades. Their ownership had been erased from the Academy registry years ago. The result was impossible to dismiss. The sword was not eating metal, it was following a rule. Lucan's jaw tightened. He understood enough to hate it, but not enough to explain it away. Then the black dagger moved again. This time, it did not pull toward the Crownless Blade. It turned by itself. The dagger's tip scraped across the stone table and pointed toward the sealed arch at the back of the armory. The old arch was covered in dust, rusted chains, and a faded Academy warning mark. The weapon clerk went pale. "That gate has been dead for 30 years, he whispered. The Academy crystal pulsed once more. Its voice was strained now, like it did not want to finish the reading. It announced that the demon fragment carried a dead weapon signature linked to the Academy's old skeleton rift. Every torch in the broken armory burned blue. Behind the sealed arch, something knocked once from the other side. Marrow raised his staff again, but this time it was not aimed at Arlen. "No one touches that gate," he said. Then the chains around the arch snapped by themselves. The old gate did not burst all the way open. Instructor Merrill and 3 Academy sealers forced it shut again before the entire armory turned into a burial pit. But once the chains snapped, there was no pretending the skeleton rift was still dead. By sunrise, the Academy turned the crisis into an inspection raid. A sealed training route connected the broken armory to the old rift chamber, and someone had to go inside before the dead gate widened again. Officially, the mission belonged to second-year combat students. Unofficially, Lord Malric wanted to see whether Arlen's sword would react to dead weapons in live combat. That was why Arlen stood at the back of the formation wearing a porter harness instead of armor. Lucan noticed immediately. He looked at the spare shields, rope, and broken practice swords hanging from Arlen's back and smirked. "So that's your real level," he said. "Porter." Arlen adjusted the straps and said nothing. Merrill gave the orders out loud. The front line would engage. The support mages would seal side tunnels. The porter would carry reserve gear, recovery wire, and discarded weapons back to the checkpoint. The way he said porter made the nobles smile. Then the rift door opened. Cold, grave air rolled through the chamber. The first corridor was lined with black stone and broken knight statues. Pale fire burned in iron wall bowls, and dry footsteps echoed deeper inside. The team moved carefully at first, but the tension eased when the first wave finally appeared. They were only low skeletons. Lucan's new sword cut through one in a single swing. Another noble smashed 2 more with a heavy aura strike. A support mage pinned a 4th to the wall with a chain spell. Bone fragments scattered across the floor, and the formation relaxed. One student even laughed. That was the hidden danger? Arlen did not laugh. He was looking at the weapons. Each skeleton carried a rusted sword or chipped axe. Their bodies fell apart when struck, but the weapons hit the ground still humming with dead mana. That felt wrong. The deeper the team pushed, the more broken arms and snapped blades Arlen collected from the rear. He did his porter job exactly the way they expected, quietly carrying damaged gear while the nobles took the glory at the front. Then the corridor widened into an old burial hall. Stone coffins lined both walls. A cracked banner of the Academy's original crest hung from the ceiling. Beneath it stood 6 skeleton knights in rusted mail, each holding a long dead sword with a black core buried in the center of the blade. Marrow's voice sharpened. Combat line forward. Lucan moved first, probably because he needed to reclaim his pride after the arena. His opening strike was perfect. Silver aura carved straight through the lead skeleton's rib cage. The body exploded. Then the rusted sword hit the floor, rang once, and the bones pulled themselves back together around it. The skeleton stood again. The front line froze. A second noble cut down another knight. The same thing happened. Bone shattered. Sword remained. Skeleton reformed. That was when the burial hall turned ugly. The skeleton knights advanced together. Swords dragged black lines through the air and bit through shields like the metal was wet wood. One student lost his guard completely. Another got thrown into a coffin hard enough to crack the stone lid. Lucan blocked one downward strike and nearly lost his new blade. Arlen saw the answer, a second before anyone else did. The skeleton was not the core. The weapon was. He dropped the spare shields and pulled out the Crownless Blade. Rough, pale splinters still ran along the wood from its last form. "Marrow," Arlen said. "Break the sword, not the bones." The instructor heard him, but he was too busy keeping the line from collapsing. So Arlen moved. He slipped past the rear formation, ducked a backswing from a skeleton knight, and met the dead blade with Splinter Edge. Impact numbed his fingers. The second strike split the rusted sword near its black core. The moment the blade cracked, the skeleton knight staggered like someone had kicked the spine out of it. Arlen did not wait. Whoa! Black gold seams burst open across the crownless blade and swallowed the broken dead sword fragment before it hit the floor. Every torch in the burial hall flared blue. The mission crystal fixed to Marrow's wrist announced the change for the whole team. Arlen's weapon had absorbed a defeated dead weapon signature and formed a new edge pattern. The new form was called Grave Edge. Dark silver marks spread over the crownless blade. The pale splinters fused into a longer, cleaner edge, and a cold grave light ran beneath the wood, like moonlight trapped under ice. Arlen swung once. This time he did not aim at ribs. He cut through the next skeleton knight's sword, then through the black monocore inside the hilt. The entire knight collapsed in one motion and did not rise again. Now the others understood. Marrow shouted the right order. Break the weapon first. Destroy the dead core second. The burial hall became a real fight after that. Lucan shattered one knight's guard and drove it toward Arlen's lane. A support mage pinned another with a chain seal, while Arlen cut its sword apart. Even the student who had laughed earlier stopped panicking long enough to drag a wounded teammate out of range. By the time the last skeleton fell, the hall was covered in dead steel fragments and bone dust. No one cheered. They were too busy staring at Arlen. He was breathing hard. One hand pressed against the crownless blade because it still wanted to pull every broken dead weapon in the room toward itself. Marrow looked down at the mission crystal strapped to his wrist. The crystal announced the raid contribution results aloud. Top combat value, Arlen Ash. Special condition cleared. Dead weapon cycle interrupted. Recorded weapon note. Defeated weapon authority absorbed. Lucan heard that last line clearly. So did Arlen. Then the mission crystal announced one more thing. The burial hall was not the rift core. Something stronger was waiting deeper inside. Marrow did not let anyone chase the deeper signal. The team was injured, the shields were broken, and the dead weapon cycle was still not fully understood. If they went deeper now, the next room would kill someone. The team stopped at the rift checkpoint. 2 students were injured, 3 shields were ruined, and the mission crystal had warned them. The burial hall was not the core. Marrow refused to push deeper. Nobody argued. The dead weapon cycle had nearly killed the front line. If they moved now, the next room would finish the job. That pause gave Lucan time to stare at Arlen. Porter sat alone with the crownless blade. The crystal had named him top contributor. Lucan hated that more than the arena loss. He looked at the broken weapons by the recovery crates. Rusted skeleton swords, snapped academy blades, a cracked reserve saber. The answer looked simple. Break a weapon. Feed the fragment. Gain power. That was the wrong lesson. Lucan slipped into a side maintenance room. He carried the cracked saber. He carried a dead sword fragment. He carried one of his own noble blades. The room was narrow and cold. Old weapon stands lined the walls, perfect for a private test. He broke the reserve saber first. Then he pressed the fragment against his noble blade. Nothing happened. He pushed more aura through the guard. Still nothing. The broken saber stayed broken, so he picked up the dead sword fragment. This one carried grave mana. This one had to work. He cracked it near the old black core scar. Dark dust spilled across the bench. When it touched his blade, a black line finally crawled along the fuller. Lucan smiled. Then the line stopped. His noble blade shrieked. A crack split from guard to tip. Dead mana burst backward into his hand. Lucan dropped the sword and stumbled away. It hit the floor ringing. Not with power. With rejection. Arlen opened the door a moment later. He had followed the dead mana spike through the checkpoint. Lucan straightened. Like getting caught was the insult. You kept the rule to yourself. Arlen looked at the 3 weapons. I did not. You copied the wrong part. The reserve saber was damaged, but still assigned. Lucan's noble blade had a living bond. The dead fragment had never been defeated by him. Broken and defeated were not the same thing. The split noble blade twitched on the floor. A black strand leaked toward the crack. It was not merging. It was contaminating. Arlen pinned the fragment with the crownless blade. Gravelight flashed under the wooden edge. The black strand snapped. Lucan finally understood what almost happened. 10 seconds later, the dead mana would have climbed into his arm. Marrow appeared in the doorway. He saw the split sword. He saw the dead fragment. He saw Lucan's pale face. Out! Lucan tried to speak. Marrow cut him off. Experimenting with dead weapons during an active rift inspection could contaminate the checkpoint. If that happened, Marrow would have sealed him outside it. That did not sound like a threat. It sounded like policy. Lucan went quiet. The nobles were still richer than Arlen, better trained, better connected. But now they knew something worse. They could not copy him just by watching. Before the team returned to the surface, Lucan sent one private request through his family seal. He wanted every surviving record on Arlen Ash, and every sealed weapon report tied to the old Academy rift. The Academy did not let the inspection raid continue deeper after Lucan's failed experiment. Instructor Marrow sealed the checkpoint, reported the dead weapon cycle, and ordered every student back to the surface. Officially, the team had gathered enough evidence for one day. Unofficially, everyone knew the Academy needed time to decide what Arlen Ash had become. That decision came faster than expected. The next afternoon, Crown Rift Academy announced an emergency freshman ranking exam. The excuse was simple. After the Skeleton Rift incident, every first-year combat student had to prove their weapon control in front of instructors, sponsors, and Crown observers. The real reason was even simpler. They wanted to test Arlen in public again. The arena was repaired, but the crack in the Academy crystal had not been replaced. It sat above the main platform with a silver brace wrapped around its center. Like even the crystal needed a bandage after reading the Crownless Blade. The first student called was a noble swordsman from House Renward. He stepped out with a polished aura blade and faced a C-rank armored golem, machine charged. The noble met it head-on, split its chest plate, and bowed while the crowd applauded. Next came a mage knight with a lightning spear. His target was a flying shield drone built to dodge student spells. He waited for the exact moment it crossed the center line, threw once, and pinned it to the arena wall. The cheers grew louder. Then a summoner brought out a stone hound and crushed a reinforced dummy with one command. The announcer smiled toward the noble seats. Crown Rift Academy's freshman class remains promising. Then Arlen's name was called. The sound changed exactly the way it had during the first demonstration. Some students leaned forward. Some nobles looked annoyed. Lucan stood near the side platform with his repaired blade at his hip, watching without pretending he was not interested. Arlen stepped onto the arena floor with the Crownless Blade at his side. It looked almost harmless again, except for the pale splinters and grave silver marks running under the wooden surface. The announcer cleared his throat and motioned toward the lowest target rack. For safety reasons, Cadet Ash will face an F-rank wooden target. The crowd laughed, but not as loudly as before. People had seen too much now. Arlen looked at the wooden target, then at the row behind it. There were armed golems waiting there. D-rank, C-rank, and one B-rank model with a reinforced weapon arm. The B-rank golem was not meant for freshmen. Its job was to test second-year students who had already survived 3 licensed rift raids. Arlen pointed at it. "I'll take the armed one." The announcer froze. Instructor Merrill looked like he already expected this and hated that he expected it. The noble seats stirred. Lucan smiled for the first time all day because this looked like arrogance. It learned one useful thing from his failure. Arlen needed broken or defeated weapons. A golem was not alive. Its weapon arm had no soul, no owner bond, and no dead authority. If Arlen could not feed the sword, the whole arena would see the limit. The B-rank golem stepped onto the floor. It was twice as tall as Arlen, covered in layered iron plates with a heavy axe arm built into its right side. The Academy crystal announced the target's reading aloud. It said the golem's armor could withstand C-rank student attacks and that its weapon arm was reinforced against disarmament. That last line made Lucan's smile widen. The signal sounded. The golem moved immediately. Its axe arm slammed down hard enough to crack the arena stone. Arlen rolled aside, came up low, and struck the joint near the elbow. The Crownless Blade sparked, but the axe arm did not break. The crowd felt that. For the first time since the sword awakened, its first strike had failed to take anything. The golem swung again. Arlen blocked with the flat of the blade and slid back 3 steps. The force ran through his arms and made the grave light flicker. Lucan's voice carried from the side. "So it does have a limit," Arlen heard him. Then he changed targets. He stopped aiming for the axe itself and started cutting the locks around it. Splinter Edge scraped through the outer bolts. Grave Edge slid into the dead gaps where the golem's mana circuit had been over-repaired again and again. The axe arm was not a living weapon, but it had been broken before, repaired, broken again. Repaired again. Every repair left a little dead authority sealed inside the mechanism. Arlen saw the pattern. The golem raised its axe for a third strike. Arlen stepped in instead of back, drove the Crownless Blade into the elbow joint and twisted. The axe arm snapped free. Black gold seams opened across the Crownless Blade, but this time they moved slowly, like the sword was chewing through something heavy. The broken weapon arm collapsed into fragments and dragged itself into the blade piece by piece. The Academy crystal announced the reaction in a strained voice. The Crownless Blade had absorbed defeated artificial weapon authority and formed a new edge pattern. The new form was called Iron Arm Edge. The sword changed again. A thick, dark guard formed around Arlen's hand. Iron plates locked along the lower blade, and the edge gained a heavy gray line that looked less sharp than brutal. The B-rank golem tried to punch with its remaining arm. Arlen met it head-on. One swing. The iron arm edge did not cut like a noble sword. It crushed through the golem's chest plate, shattered the core housing, and sent the machine sliding backward in 2 broken halves. The arena went silent again. The repaired crystal tried to assign Arlen a freshman rank. Its light climbed past the lower tiers. Then it stopped. The crystal announced that Cadet Arlen Ash could not be placed inside the standard freshman ranking table because his weapon authority changed classification during the exam. Lord Malric stood in the observer box. He was not smiling now. Instructor Marrow looked at Arlen, then at the destroyed B-rank golem, then at the brace holding the cracked crystal together. "Exam result?" the announcer asked carefully. The crystal answered before Marrow could. "Special review required. Royal Weapon Oversight recommended." Arlen lowered the Crownless Blade. Iron Arm Edge faded slowly, but the weight remained in his wrist. Across the arena, Lucan stared at the broken golem arm fragments still disappearing into the sword. He had been wrong again. The Crownless Blade did not only feed on noble swords, dead swords, or practice scraps. If a weapon had been broken enough times, repaired enough times, and defeated at the right moment, even a machine arm could become fuel. And that meant the ranking exam had not exposed Arlen's limit. It had expanded it. Arlen was not sent back to the dorms after the ranking exam. That would have made too much sense. Instead, Instructor Merrill marched him straight from the arena to the lower repair forge, where damaged student weapons were inspected before being returned to storage. Officially, the Academy needed a safety report on the Crownless Blade after Iron Arm Edge destroyed a B-rank golem. Unofficially, Merrow did not want Arlen standing near another weapon rack in public. The repair forge was nothing like the noble armories above. No polished display cases, no family crests, no gold-edged training blades, just iron benches, cracked shields, bent swords, scorched spearheads, and students in soot-stained uniforms trying to fix what the rich students broke. A girl at the central bench looked up when Merrill entered. She had short, dark hair tied back with a strip of cloth, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a heavy hammer sword resting beside her workstation. The weapon was old, patched, and cracked near the head, but every repair mark had been done carefully. Merrill pointed at her. "Sarah Flint, you handle failed weapon diagnostics." Sarah glanced at Arlen, then at the Crownless Blade. "I handle weapons that rich students call failed," she said. "There's a difference." Merrow did not react to the tone. "Then look at this one." Arlen set the Crownless Blade on the iron bench. The weapon looked quiet now. The iron arm plates had faded, leaving only the wooden core, pale splinters, grave silver lines, and a faint weight in the guard that had not been there before. Sarah did not touch it right away. That already made her smarter than most people in the academy. She circled the bench, studying the seams, the grain, and the way the blade leaned slightly toward the damaged weapons around the room. Then she looked at Arlen's wrist. Black gold cracks ran under his skin like thin roots. "You're bleeding mana into it," she said. Arlen looked down. The marks had been there since the golem fight, but he had been ignoring them. Merrow's expression tightened. Sarah reached for a measuring charm, then stopped. The Crownless Blade shifted, not toward the broken swords on the far rack, toward her hammer sword. The old weapon on her bench gave one low hum. Sarah froze. The cracked hammer sword was not noble, it was not polished, it was not high rank, but it had been broken, repaired, used, and kept alive so many times that the Crownless Blade recognized it as something rich with history. The black gold seams opened. Arlen moved before anyone else understood what was happening. He grabbed the Crownless Blade barehanded and slammed it flat against the bench. The forge lights flickered. The sword pulled harder. Its edge turned toward Sarah's hammer sword like a starving animal catching scent. Arlen planted his other hand on the wooden core and forced the blade down. Pain ran through his wrist, sharp and cold, but he did not let go. Sarah stepped back, one hand on the hammer sword's grip. Merrow raised his staff, but Arlen shook his head once. "If you seal it now," Arlen said through his teeth, "it will tear toward the closest weapon when the seal breaks." Sarah understood before Merrow did. She grabbed 3 iron clamps from the wall and slammed them across the Crownless Blade's guard, spine, and tip. Then she pulled a strip of dull sealing wire from her own toolbox and wrapped it around the wooden core. The wire burned black, then gold, then it held. The Crownless Blade finally stopped pulling. Arlen let go slowly. A new mark had opened across his palm, but the sword had not eaten the hammer sword. Sarah stared at him for a long second. "You stopped it," she said. Arlen flexed his fingers and failed to hide the shake in them. "It was your weapon. That's not why most students here stop." No one spoke after that. The forge sounded louder in the silence. Hammers from the far benches, cooling metal, a shield chain rattling on the wall. Sarah looked at the Crownless Blade again, but her expression had changed. She was not looking at a forbidden relic anymore. She was looking at a weapon with a hunger problem. "This thing doesn't need a stronger edge," she said. "It needs a leash." Merrill lowered his staff. "A seal?" Sarah shook her head. "A scabbard. Not the decorative kind nobles wear. A control scabbard, something that limits how many traits can wake at once and keeps the sword from lunging at every cracked weapon with history." Arlen looked at the smoking wire around the blade. "Can you make one?" "Not a real one," Sarah said. "Not yet." Merrill frowned. "What do you need?" Sarah tapped the burned wire with a pair of tongs. "Metal that has survived being broken without losing its shape. Monster Forge metal would work. So would Wyvern Ridge scrap if you can get it." That name made Merrill go still. Wyvern Ridge was not an academy classroom. It was a licensed recovery zone where noble teams farmed monster parts, and commoner students carried what they left behind. Before Arlen could ask anything else, the forge door opened. A royal aide in a black uniform stepped inside and bowed without warmth. "Cadet Arlen Ash," he said, "Lord Malric is ready for the weapon oversight hearing." The Crownless Blade pulsed once inside Sarah's clamps. Arlen looked at the sword, then at Sarah. She tightened the wire one more turn and gave him the first useful advice anyone had given him all day. "Whatever he offers," she said, Don't let him test it near other weapons. The royal aide took Arlen above the academy vault. The old oath chamber had no desks, no crowd, no target dummies, only a judgment table, 3 officials, and Lord Malric. Marrow entered behind him. Sarah was not allowed inside. That was the first problem. The second problem stood behind Malric. 12 sealed royal blades waited in black iron holders. Each one was chained. Each chain carried the crown weapon seal. Arlen remembered Sarah's warning. Do not test the sword near other weapons. The crownless blade pulsed under the wire. Malric noticed. He listed Arlen's victories like crimes: unregistered authority, resisted seizure, rift disruption, destroyed academy property. Arlen looked at the table. Destroyed academy property? Malric answered without blinking. The B-rank golem. It attacked me. It was supposed to. That was how Malric fought, not with anger, with rules. He slid a black folder across the table. The document carried Arlen's name, the academy crest, the crown weapon seal. 3 claims on 1 student. Malric said unknown weapons belonged under crown review. Then he pointed to the testing circle. The circle sat too close to the sealed blades. The crownless blade pulled toward them. Arlen felt it through the wire. No! The room went still. He kept one hand on the wrapped sword. Not near those weapons, one official scoffed. Marrow looked at the rack and understood. He backed Arlen's refusal. The sword had reacted near Sarah's damaged weapon in the forge. Testing it beside royal blades was unsafe. Malric smiled. Now the trap worked either way. If Arlen allowed the test, the sword might lunge. If he refused, the crown could call it unstable. Malric slid out a second document. It unfolded by itself. A red map burned across the paper. Wyvern Ridge. Sarah needed monster-forged metal. Malric needed field data. The contract gave both things. Teeth. Arlen could keep temporary possession if he completed the recovery mission. He had to retrieve monster-forged metal. He had to prove controlled deployment. If he failed, the sword went to the crown. Marrow leaned toward him. This is a contract, not an assignment. Arlen read past the main terms. Then he found the lower clause. Any fragment consumed during the mission became crown-indexed property. Every upgrade would belong to Malric on paper. Arlen set the document down. One change. Anything the sword consumed to survive stayed bonded to him until the mission ended. The crown could review it later. But only while Arlen was holding it. The officials looked offended that he could read. Malric studied him. Then he laughed once. Your father had the same annoying habit. The room cooled. Arlen did not move. Malric signed the change with a black gold seal. Temporary bonded possession lasted until mission completion. Uncontrolled consumption would strip the clause in front of the academy. The contract burned blue. A thin legal mark settled over the crownless blade. The sword rejected it for 1 second. Then it calmed. Wyvern Ridge departure was set for tomorrow morning. At the door, Malric gave one final warning. The crown did not hate commoners with dangerous weapons. It hated commoners who forgot the weapon was dangerous. Arlen looked back at the sealed blades. I have not forgotten. The crownless blade pulsed under the wire, and neither has it. Wyvern Ridge looked like a graveyard for expensive weapons. Broken ballista bolts stuck out of the cliffside. Burned shield frames lay in ash. Snapped anti-dragon lances covered the stone. The noble teams walked past all of it. They went straight to the polished recovery wagons. Quartermasters handed out fresh anti-dragon gear, fireproof cloaks, chain launchers, sponsor weapons with family crests. Arlen was sent to the damaged rack. Of course he was. The contract gave him observation, not privilege. Marrow came as academy supervisor. A crown recorder came from Malric. Sarah came as weapon diagnostic support. He looked at the broken lances and clicked her tongue. They gave you ridge scrap before we even got the ridge scrap. Arlen picked up a cracked lance head. The metal was heavy and burned along one side. The crownless blade shifted under its wire. Sarah tightened the restraint. Not yet. If the sword pulled too early, it would chew through the entire rack. Lucan arrived with the forward team. His uniform was clean again. His blade was repaired. His expression was too calm. Still collecting trash? Arlen slid the lance head into his sling. Still losing swords? Sarah choked once, then checked the wire. Marrow stepped between them. The first route was supposed to be safe. Lesser drakes nested on the lower shelves. Noble teams farmed them every month. The contract target was not the drakes. It was monster-forged metal from broken anti-dragon gear. The crown recorder made the terms clear. Retrieve usable material. Demonstrate controlled weapon deployment. If the sword lost control, Malric would know before they returned. At first, the nobles looked as strong as they claimed. Lucan's group pinned 2 lesser drakes with chain launchers. A fire mage burned the wing membrane off a third. Another student dropped a drake with a sponsor lance. The ridge filled with cheers. Arlen stayed near the rear with Sarah. They gathered cracked lance sockets, burned chain links, a half-melted spearhead marked by scales. The crownless blade pulled toward every piece. Each tug ran through Arlen's wrist. Less grip, Sarah said. I am not gripping hard. That is the problem. She tapped the wire. He needed to fight the pull with the scabbard line. Arlen shifted his hold. The restraint caught the first hunger. Then the ridge went silent. Every lesser drake flattened against the stone. A shadow crossed the cliff. The real wyvern landed on the upper ridge. It was long, scarred, and dark green. Iron-gray plates covered its throat. Broken lance shafts stuck from its shoulder like trophies. The noble teams fired first. 3 chain launchers wrapped around its wings. The wyvern flexed once. The chains tore apart. A sponsor's spear hit its chest. The spear bounced off screaming. Then the tail swept across the ridge. The front line broke. Shields shattered. Students scattered. One recovery wagon flipped onto its side. Lucan held longer than the others. His aura blade cut a shallow line across the wyvern's jaw. The monster slammed him with its plated throat. Lucan flew across the stone. The crown recorder nearly fell backing away. Marrow raised a barrier. The wyvern's breath hit it like a furnace blast. Arlen saw the broken lance before the opening. It was trapped under the flipped wagon. The shaft was snapped. The head was still intact. That metal had survived dragon heat and failed repairs. Sarah saw him looking. No full merge. I know. No, you do not. A full weapon merge would lock his arm before he swung. Arlen moved anyway. He slid under the wagon. His fingers closed around the lance head. Crownless Blade pulled so hard the wire screamed. He did not feed it the whole weapon. He drove splinter edge into the socket crack. Only the surviving head broke free. Only that piece entered the blade. The Crownless Blade changed with a violent pulse. A jagged white gold fang formed along the upper edge. The wooden core bent under the weight. Arlen's shoulder dropped. The recorder's crystal announced Drake Fang Edge. Arlen could barely lift it. Sarah grabbed the wire with both hands. One thrust. No swing. The wyvern broke Marrow's barrier. Arlen stepped into the gap. He did not aim for the chest. He aimed for the seam Lucan had scratched. Drake Fang Edge punched forward once. Not clean, not elegant. One brutal thrust. The throat plate cracked from jaw to collarbone. The wyvern screamed and staggered back. Then it launched itself toward the upper valley. The monster was wounded, not dead. Arlen dropped to one knee. Both hands locked around the sword. Drake Fang faded. The weight stayed in his arm. Sarah wrapped the wire twice around the guard. The recorder's crystal announced controlled deployment. Monster forged material recovered. Wyvern class damage recorded. For 1 second it sounded like a win. Then Malric's seal pulsed through the crystal. The contract remained incomplete. The wyvern core had not been recovered. The wyvern did not die, so the nobles tried to pretend the mission had not counted. That was hard to do when the ridge was still smoking behind them. By sunset, the surviving teams returned to Crown Rift Academy with broken armor, cracked sponsor weapons, and 1 wagon full of recovered ridge scrap. The contract remained incomplete because the wyvern core was missing, but the Academy still had to verify every recovered material before it could be sold, stored, or assigned. That was how Arlen ended up in the verification hall. The place looked more like a noble auction house than a schoolroom. Long tables were covered in monster scales, cracked cores, drake teeth, lance heads, chain reels, and damaged weapons tagged by team. Appraisers in blue gloves moved between them, testing quality and assigning values while sponsors watched from raised balconies. The noble teams went first. Lucan's group submitted lesser drake cores, 2 intact scale bundles, and a sponsor lance that still carried a shallow mark from the real wyvern's throat plate. Appraiser praised the materials, assigned a high recovery value, and the noble balcony applauded politely. Then another team presented a complete fireproof cloak, 3 chain launcher reels, and drake wingbone. More applause. Arlen's table was last. Of course it was. He and Sarah set down what they had recovered: cracked lance sockets, burned chain links, a half-melted spearhead, throat plate flakes, and the broken anti-dragon lance head that had become Drake Fang Edge for 1 strike. One appraiser looked at the pile and almost sighed. "This is salvage," he said. Sarah's face went flat. That is the point of verification. The appraiser ignored her and reached for the rejection stamp. Arlen put one hand on the table. "Test it." The hall quieted faster than he expected. Maybe people were waiting to see whether the poor scholarship cadet would embarrass himself again. Maybe they were waiting to see whether the sword would eat the table. Either way, the appraiser could not refuse in front of sponsors. He gestured to the center platform. The verification test was simple. Each recovered weapon fragment had to prove it retained function against a sheet of wyvern hide cloth. Weak blades skidded off. Overburned metal snapped. Fake monster-forged alloy crumbled. Lucan's marked sponsor lance went first. It cut a shallow line across the cloth and earned approval. Balcony applauded again. Then Sarah carried Arlen's half-melted spearhead to the platform. Someone laughed. The spearhead looked ugly. One side was bubbled from dragon heat, the other was warped from being stepped on by something enormous. Sarah set it into the test grip anyway. The appraiser activated the machine. The spearhead scraped against the wyvern hide cloth. At first, it did nothing. The noble balcony began to murmur. Then the edge shifted. Not magically, structurally. The melted side caught in the scarred grain of the hide. The warped ridge dragged across a weak scale seam. Instead of cutting clean, it tore through the cloth the way a hook tore through rope. Paul went quiet. Sarah smiled a little. Ugly does not mean useless. The appraiser checked the damage twice. Then he assigned the spearhead a functional recovery grade. Arlen submitted the cracked lance sockets next. They failed as weapons, but when Sarah explained their heat resistance, the appraiser tested them as reinforcement material instead. They survived 3 bursts from the forge flame. Another grade appeared. Then came the burned chain links. Those should have been trash, but when the machine pulled them apart, they stretched under pressure and snapped back without breaking. The appraiser changed the category from chain scrap to restraint alloy. Sarah looked at Arlen. That is scabbard metal. The crownless blade pulsed once under the wire, like it understood. The last piece was the throat plate flake from the wyvern. It was small, dark, and jagged. Arlen placed it on the platform himself. The appraiser's expression changed as soon as the crystal touched it. This was not normal scale. The crystal announced that the material had been fused with failed anti-dragon steel over repeated battles. Weapon scars had grown into the monster's body, and the plate had learned to resist the same attacks that created it. The sponsors leaned forward. Now they cared. The auction value climbed fast. Too fast. Arlen realized the problem at the same time Sarah did. If the material sold to a sponsor, it would disappear into a noble workshop by morning. Sarah needed it for the control scabbard. Arlen spoke before the bidding opened. I claim the flake under contract necessity. The appraiser blinked. Malric's crown recorder stepped forward from the side of the hall. Contract necessity must be approved by crown oversight. Of course he was there. Arlen looked at the recorder, then at the throat plate flake. The contract requires controlled deployment. My diagnostic support confirmed I need restraint metal to prevent uncontrolled consumption. That material helps build the restraint. The recorder's crystal flickered as it checked the contract wording. Sarah held her breath. Finally, the crystal announced provisional approval. The flake, chain links, and lance sockets would be reserved for contract safety work instead of open auction. The noble balcony did not applaud that. Arlen did not care. For the first time since the contract began, he had something useful that Malric could not immediately take. And the verification clerk approached with a sealed delivery box. Additional discarded weapon submissions for Cadet Ash, she said. Several students requested disposal through your registered weapon authority. The box was filled with broken blades. Most were harmless. One was wrapped in black cloth. The crownless blade went still, not calm, still. Sarah noticed immediately. Do not open that here, she said. Across the hall, the crown recorder's crystal flashed once with Malric's seal. Arlen looked at the black-wrapped blade. The auction hall suddenly felt much too crowded. Sarah did not let Arlen touch the black-wrapped blade. That alone told him enough. She dragged the delivery box away from the verification table. The auction hall was still packed. Sponsors, students, appraisers, broken weapons everywhere. If the sword reacted here, Malric would not need another reason to take it. They moved into a side inspection room. Merrill followed. So did the crown recorder. That was worse. The room was small and cold. Blue glass cabinets lined the walls. Ceiling circles covered the floor. Sarah set the box in the center circle. Then she pointed at the recorder. If that blade is dangerous, this room gets sealed first. Not reported first. The recorder looked offended. Merrill looked like he agreed. Arlen stood near the door. The crownless blade stayed wrapped in wire. It did not pull toward the box. It did not shake. It went completely still. That felt worse. Sarah opened the box. Most weapons were ordinary failures. Snapped rapiers, bent knives, training blades with cracked cores. Then she lifted the black-wrapped blade with tongs. The cloth clung to the metal. The quarter's crystal called it an abandoned iron fragment. No active owner. No measurable rank. Harmless on paper. Arlen's hidden sight opened behind the reading. Demon blade fragment. Immediate combat amplification. Long-term corruption of the sword arm. Arlen's wrist went cold. Sarah saw his face. Bad? Very. The crownless blade moved 1 inch. The room reacted like it had lunged a mile. Sarah tightened the wire. Marrow raised his staff. The recorder lifted his crystal higher. The demon blade offered the easiest answer. One merge could restore everything Arlen had spent. It could win the tournament. It could finish the wyvern contract. It could make the crown fear him. That was why it was bait. Arlen did not reach for it. The demon fragment moved instead. A red line opened under the black cloth. It tried to connect without permission. Backlash hit Arlen's arm. His fingers opened. The sword dropped 1/2 inch. Sarah caught the wire and yanked it tight. Marrow! Blue Academy seals rose around the demon fragment. The red line burned through the first layer. The recorder did not help. He only watched. That confirmed it. This was a test Malric could deny. Sarah looped the wire around her hammer sword handle. She used her own weapon as an anchor. The crownless blade pulled hard enough to drag her boots across the floor. She held. Arlen forced his numb fingers closed. He lifted the sword just enough to aim, not to eat the demon fragment, to cut the connection. Grave Edge answered first. Cold silver light sliced through the black strand. Splinter Edge flared after it. The corrupted seal broke into harmless pieces. The demon fragment hit the floor with a dead clang. For a moment, everything stopped. Then the recorder's crystal spoke. It recorded that Arlen had refused an available abandoned weapon merge. It also recorded prevented uncontrolled consumption. The recorder's smile was gone. Marrow turned toward him. Convenient. The recorder tucked the crystal against his chest. This will be sent to Lord Malric. Good, Sarah said. Send the part where he did not take the bait. The man left without answering. Arlen tried to lower the sword. His arm did not move right. Everything from wrist to elbow felt distant. Sarah noticed immediately. She grabbed the reserved chain links from the verification crate. We start the scabbard now. Marrow looked at the sealed demon fragment. And that? Arlen looked at the red line still pulsing inside the broken blade. Lock it somewhere. Malric cannot call abandoned. Marrow nodded once. By morning, the tournament final had changed meaning. It was no longer just an academy event. It was Malric's next public control test. The tournament should have been cancelled after the demon blade trap. It was not. Malric needed a public answer. If Arlen lost control in front of the academy, the crown would win. If he held control, the contract stayed alive. So by the next afternoon, the arena was full again. Sponsors came to look calm. Nobles came to look brave. The crown recorder came to watch for one mistake. The throat plate flake sat near the mouth of the scabbard like a dark tooth. Dull sealing wire wrapped the whole thing in uneven bands. It looked nothing like noble craft, but when the sword pulled toward the weapon racks, the scabbard caught the hunger before it reached Arlen's wrist. Sarah checked the last clamp. 3 traits, she said. That is all it can wake safely. If you force more, your arm goes numb again. Arlen flexed his fingers. They still answered late after rejecting the demon blade. 3 is enough. No, Sarah said. 3 is survivable. The announcer called Lucan Vale's name. The crowd roared. Lucan entered from the opposite gate, wearing a white dueling coat marked with House Vale silver. 12 swords floated behind him in a perfect wheel. Each one had a different shape, different length, and different aura pattern. He had not come to show off. He had come prepared. The Academy Crystal announced the tournament final. Cadet Arlen Ash against Cadet Lucan Vale. Standard duel rules. No lethal strikes. Weapon destruction permitted if caused during legal exchange. That last line made the crowd stir. Lucan smiled. You taught me something, he said across the arena. A weapon has to lose before your sword can eat it. The 12 swords spread wider. So I brought weapons that will never stay long enough to lose. The signal rang. Lucan moved first. The first sword shot forward like a silver needle. Arlen raised the crownless blade, but the blade withdrew before contact could settle. The second came from the left. The third dropped from above. The fourth skimmed low across the floor. Each strike touched, sparked, and vanished. None of the swords stayed in the clash long enough to crack. None of them accepted defeat. Arlen tried Splinter Edge first. Pale shards caught one blade near the tip, but Lucan dismissed it before the fracture spread. Grave Edge answered next, but the Deadlight had nothing to bite because Lucan's swords were all clean, living, and owner-bound. Iron Arm Edge would have been too heavy, so Arlen kept it asleep. The crowd realized what was happening at the same time he did. Lucan had built a style around denial, not winning quickly, not overpowering him, just refusing to feed the crownless blade. The fifth sword cut Arlen's sleeve. The sixth struck the scabbard and made the chain link scream. The seventh clipped his shoulder hard enough to turn his stance. Sarah gripped the railing below the forge seats. Do not chase them, she muttered, even though he could not hear her. Lucan heard the crowd shifting. For the first time since the opening duel, they believed Arlen might actually lose. That was when Lucan pressed harder. 4 swords came at once. Arlen blocked 2 and let the third scrape along the crownless blade's lower edge. The fourth slammed into the scabbard mouth and cracked one of the pale splinters from section 3 clean off. Pain flashed through Arlen's wrist, but the sword did not pull toward Lucan's weapon. It pulled toward itself. Arlen noticed. The broken splinter falling from the crownless blade carried old F-tier practice sword authority. His stored history. It was no longer an enemy weapon, but it had been broken in a legal exchange. Lucan's next sword came for his ribs. Arlen did something that made the whole arena gasp. He lowered his guard. The blade struck the crownless blade instead of his body and shattered another stored edge. Sarah's eyes went wide. Arlen, no. But our guy was not giving up. He was choosing what to lose. Lucan thought he had finally cornered him and sent 6 swords at once. Arlen twisted through the first 2, blocked the third, and let the fourth destroy the old Grave Edge line. He caught the fifth against the scabbard, then angled the sixth into the iron guard until the iron arm trace cracked loose. 3 old forms broke away from the crownless blade. The scabbard chain links burned gold, and the sword opened inward, not like a mouth-eating prey, like a forge folding steel. The broken splinter, grave, and iron traces sank back into the wooden core. Black gold seams tightened instead of spreading. The blade shortened, compressed, and rebuilt itself into a cleaner form with one dark edge, one pale edge and a thin grave light line running between them. The Academy crystal announced a new edge pattern. Reforged edge. Lucan's face changed. He understood first. Arlen did not need Lucan's swords to lose. It made his own stored forms lose on purpose, then merged the broken history back into something he could control. The next exchange lasted 3 seconds. Lucan sent all 12 swords. Arlen stepped forward for the first time in the duel. Reforged edge did not chase the blades. It waited for their rotation to cross. One swing struck the empty center of the wheel, where every weapon bond pulled away from every other at once. The 12-sword formation collapsed. 6 blades spun into the barrier. 4 slammed into the arena floor. 1 stopped inches from Lucan's throat. The last cracked down the middle and fell at Arlen's feet. The Crownless Blade did not eat it. Arlen held it back. That was the part everyone saw. Lucan saw it too. He looked at the cracked sword, then at Arlen. For once, he did not accuse him of cheating. The Academy crystal announced the final result. Winner, Arlen Ash. Special note, controlled authority restraint confirmed under prepared countermeasure. The crowd did not know whether to cheer or stay afraid. Malric stood in the observer box, expression unreadable. Then the arena floor answered before anyone else could. A red line appeared between the white stones, not from Lucan's sword, not from Arlen's, from far below the Academy. The same red line that had pulsed inside the demon blade fragment. Marrow shouted for the barriers. Too late. The old Academy crest carved beneath the arena split open, and a cold breath rolled up from the sealed battlefield underneath. Every broken practice sword in the weapon racks began to tremble. The arena did not split like stone. It opened like a wound in the Academy itself. A red line cut through the white floor, passed under Lucan's fallen swords, and crawled toward the old crest carved at the arena center. The crest had been decorative for so long that most students barely noticed it anymore. Now it bled cold light. Marrow slammed his staff down and ordered every barrier raised at once. Blue walls formed around the stands. Instructors moved faster than the students could scream. Sponsors were dragged away from the front rows. The tournament announcer dropped his crystal and ran. Arlen did not move. The Crownless Blade was pointing downward. Not toward Lucan's cracked sword, not toward the weapon racks. Toward whatever was climbing from under the Academy. The old crest split apart. A rusted gauntlet reached through first. Then a crown made of bone and broken sword guards rose from the dark. The thing that pulled itself onto the arena floor wore ancient knight armor fused with ribs of black metal. Hundreds of snapped blades were buried across its cloak like trophies. Its sword came last. That weapon was longer than a man, dark as old iron, and built from the remains of other swords. Dragon-forged steel ran through the center like a spine. Every broken edge along it whispered against the air. The Academy crystal tried to read the monster. Its voice cracked before finishing. The crystal announced a forbidden battlefield commander, the Bone Crown Knight. Then it warned that the enemy weapon was devouring nearby sword aura. That warning came too late. 3 noble students attacked before Marrow could stop them, their blades lit with clean aura, bright and polished, exactly the kind of power the Academy loved to measure. The Bone Crown Knight raised its corpse sword. The noble aura vanished into it. All 3 blades cracked at once. The students were thrown backward across the arena stones. Their weapons hit the ground empty, not broken enough to feed the Crownless Blade, just drained hollow. Lucan saw the same thing Arlen did. The enemy was not just strong. Its weapon ate authority badly, like the Crownless Blade without control. Malric stood in the observer box, one hand on the railing, his expression finally stripped of politeness. Emergency royal armament, he ordered. A sealed compartment opened beneath the judge platform. Black chains lifted a white gold sword into the arena, its blade wrapped in crown marks and old warning seals. The Crownless Blade reacted instantly. The control scabbard screamed. Sarah grabbed the railing below the forged seats. "No," she said, already knowing what Malric wanted. Malric pointed at the royal sword. "Cadet Ash, merge with the emergency armament. That is an order under battlefield authority." Arlen looked at the white gold blade. His hidden sight opened before he meant it to. The royal sword was powerful, too powerful. Its authority was pure execution. One strike, one judgment, one severed bond. If the Crownless Blade ate it, the next form would probably cut the Bone Crown Knight in half. It would also cut through Arlen's control with it. Sarah shouted from the stands. "That thing is not scabbard stable." Malric did not look at her. "The Academy is under breach." Marrow stepped between Arlen and the royal blade, and if he loses control, then we will have proof the weapon belongs to the crown. That was the first time Arlen heard the real answer spoken out loud. Even now, Malric wanted data. The Bone Crown Knight moved while they argued. Its corpse sword swept once across the arena. Marrow's barrier shattered. The shock threw instructors off their feet and cracked the reinforced wall below the noble seats. Lucan's 12-sword wheel rose again, damaged but still obedient. He sent the remaining blades at the Bone Crown Knight from 3 angles, not to win, but to pull its strike away from the wounded students. For 1 second, it worked. Then the corpse sword turned. 6 of Lucan's blades lost their light. Two shattered. One fell black and smoking to the floor. Lucan staggered, but he did not retreat. Arlen moved. Reforged edge woke inside the scabbard, cleaner than before but weaker after the tournament. He cut through one dead blade growth on the Bone Crown Knight's cloak, then used grave edge to split a black core buried underneath. The knight actually stopped, only for a breath. Then the corpse sword struck the Crownless Blade. Impact drove Arlen to one knee. The scabbard chains burned gold, then blue, then white. Sarah's control work held, but barely. The corpse sword pressed down like a mountain of dead weapons trying to force itself into the Crownless Blade. Arlen felt the offer. Hundreds of defeated weapons, a dragon-forged spine, enough power to end the breach, enough hunger to erase him. He refused the pull and rolled aside before the scabbard split completely. The Bone Crown Knight raised its sword for a second strike. Then something old flashed beneath the arena floor. A blue seal buried under the broken crest. It showed the same mark Arlen had seen only once on the faded royal debt record of his father. Arlen Ash's seal. The Crownless Blade stopped pulling toward the royal sword. It stopped pulling toward the corpse blade. Instead, it turned toward the weapon racks lining the arena walls. Every broken practice sword in the academy began to shake. Hundreds of them. F-tier blades. Discarded blades. Charity blades. The same kind of weapons every noble student had laughed at. Arlen looked from the trembling racks to the royal execution sword waiting behind Malric. For the first time all day, Malric looked uncertain. Sarah understood before anyone else. "He's not choosing the strongest weapon," she whispered. Arlen stood, one hand locked around the cracking scabbard. The Bone Crown Knight dragged its corpse sword back for the killing blow, and the Crownless Blade pointed toward the weakest swords in the room. There was no time for another explanation. The corpse sword was already falling. The only answer left was whatever the Crownless Blade chose next. The Crownless Blade ignored the royal execution sword. It ignored the corpse sword in the Bone Crown Knight's hands. It ignored every sponsor weapon scattered across the ruined arena. Then the weakest swords in Crown Rift Academy answered. Cracked wooden practice swords began to shake. Hundreds of F-tier blades rattled in their racks. Old leather grips, split tips, failed repairs. The same charity weapons nobles had mocked since the beginning. Those were commoner weapons. The same kind of trash Arlen had been handed on the first day. The Bone Crown Knight raised its corpse sword. Malric shouted from behind the cracked barrier. "Take the royal blade, Ash? Stop pretending scraps can save a kingdom." Arlen did not look at him. He looked at Sarah. The control scabbard was splitting down the center. Gold wire smoked around the guard. The Wyvern Ridge throat flake glowed like a dark star. Sarah's hands shook. Her voice stayed steady. The corpse sword would eat him. The royal sword would belong to the crown. The practice swords were ownerless, weak fuel, stable fuel, hundreds of small defeated histories, not one massive corrupted one. Marrow saw it too. He slammed his staff into the arena floor. The weapon racks opened. Every broken practice sword flew free. Nobles ducked as wooden blades filled the air. None looked impressive alone. A few should have fallen apart in flight, but the Crownless Blade did not pull like a starving animal. It waited. Arlen raised the sword with both hands. "Only what I can hold." The first practice sword broke into pale fragments, then the second, then the 10th, then the 100th. The Crownless Blade did not grow wild, it grew layered. Every weak sword became one small tooth and a wider edge. Every failed grip became a guard plate. Every discarded core became a thread in the scabbard line. The buried Academy crystal tried to name the merge. It only managed stable common fuel. Then the reading collapsed. Sarah named the form first. Crownless God Blade. The name spread before the crystal could argue. The weight hit Arlen's arm. Not as heavy as the royal blade, not as hungry as the corpse sword, still too much. His wrist marks burned black gold. The old forms flickered inside the blade. Splinter, grave, iron arm, Drake Fang, reforged edge. Then some went out. That was the price. The sword was spending what it had stored to stay stable. Drake Fang faded first, then iron arm, then the cleanest part of reforged edge. Arlen let them go. The Bone Crown Knight struck. Arlen met the corpse sword head on. The impact cracked the arena floor in a circle. Dead weapon fragments screamed inside the enemy blade. This time, the common practice swords held the line. Hundreds of weak histories became a wall. Arlen twisted the Crownless God Blade. He cut one black core from the corpse sword. The Bone Crown Knight staggered. Lucan moved before it recovered. His 12-sword wheel was ruined. 3 blades still answered him. He sent them into the corpse sword's side, not to win, to expose another core. Now! Arlen cut again. The second core split. Marrow's barrier slammed down behind the monster. It blocked the next wave of dead blades from the students. Sarah dragged the scabbard wire tight. The metal burned against her gloves. Everyone who had mocked the F-tier rack was now helping it hold. The Bone Crown Knight drove its sword down with both hands. Arlen stepped inside the strike. He did not cut the armor. He cut the weapon. One core, then another, then another. Each defeated fragment broke loose. The Crownless God Blade absorbed only what Arlen could control. Rejected the rest. Black shards fell away smoking. The wooden core stayed visible through the gold light that finally broke the bone-crowned knight. Not a bigger curse, not a royal relic. Control. The corpse sword split from tip to hilt. The undead commander froze. Every broken weapon in the arena hung silent. Then, the bone-crowned knight collapsed into ash-blue light. The sealed battlefield went dark. No one cheered at first. They were staring at Arlen's sword. It still looked like the first cracked practice sword, but hundreds of pale edges folded behind it, like a crown made from rejected blades. The Academy crystal sparked one final time. It announced a controlled god-class merge. Then it went dark. Arlen dropped to one knee. Sarah caught the scabbard before it hit the stone. Marrow raised a barrier around them, not to imprison him, to keep the crowd back. Lucan looked at the remains of his last 3 swords. I still hate that thing. Arlen looked at the quiet Crownless Blade. So do I. Malric did not speak. He stared at the royal execution sword behind him. Its seal had cracked during the final clash. No one had touched it. Far beneath the academy, another sealed weapon answered. The Crownless Blade lifted its point east. A second black gold eye opened in the darkness, and this one already had an owner.